Hello everyone. Today I'm going to briefly summarize the main points of operating exposure. This chapter examines the economic or operating exposure of a firm over time. So, what is operating exposure? Operating exposure is a type of foreign exchange exposure caused by the effect of unexpected currency fluctuations on a company's future cash flows. In other words, a risk that firm's revenue will be adversely affected due to the substantial change in the exchange rates and the inflation rate is called operating exposure. It is also referred to as economic exposure, competitive exposure, or strategic exposure. Measures any change in the present value of a firm resulting from changes in future operating cash flows caused by any unexpected change in exchange rates. Operating exposure analysis assesses the impact of changing exchange rates on a firm's own operations over coming months and years and on its competitive position versus other firms. The goal of operating exposure is to identify strategic moves or operating techniques the firm might wish to adopt to enhance its value in the face of unexpected exchange rate changes. So, how operating exposure is unique? Operating exposure, like transaction exposure, also involves the actual or potential gain or loss, but it is specific in nature and deal with a particular transaction of a firm, while the former deals with certain macro level exposure wherein not only the firm under certain gets affected, but rather the whole industry observes the change with the change in the exchange rates and the inflation rates. Therefore, with operating exposure, the entire economy is exposed to the foreign exchange risk. Since operating exposure is much broader in nature and relates the entire investment of the firm, so with the change in the exchange rates, the overall value of the firm gets altered. The firm's value is comprised of the operating cash flows and the total assets the firm possesses. It is very difficult to identify operating risk as the cash flow largely depends on the cost of the firm inputs and the prices of its outputs, where gets altered significantly with the change in the foreign exchange rates. In addition, such exposure relates to unseen challenges from the competitors, entry barriers, and so on, which are subjective in nature and are interpreted differently by different experts. Thus, operating exposure influences the competitive position of the firm substantially. Let's see how to determine the nature of the company's operating exposure. First, we need to know what is the net operating exposure. The net operating exposure of any individual business reflects its cash inflow and cash outflow by currency of its competitive position in the market. Operating cash flow arise from intercompany and intracompany receivables and payables. Well, financing cash flows are payments for the use of inter and intra companies' loans and stockholder equities. An unexpected change in exchange rates impacts a firm's expected cash flow at four levels. Short run level. So for the medium run level, there are two categories under it, the, which are equilibrium and disequilibrium. And the last one, the fourth level is long run level. So strategic management of operating exposure, operating strategies for the management of operating exposure emphasize the structuring of firms' operations in order to create matching streams of cash flow by currency. This is termed natural hedging, including diversifying operations and diversifying financing. I think the last main point is proactive management of operating exposure. So what is that? Operating and transaction exposure can be partially managed by adopting operating and or financing policies that offset anticipated currency exposures. There are six of the most commonly employed proactive policies, which are matching currency cash flow, risk sharing agreements, back to back or parallel loans, currency swaps, leads and lags, and reinvoicing centers. Proactive policies include matching currency of cash flow, currency risk sharing clauses, back to back loans, and cross currency swaps. Contractual approaches have occasionally been used to hedge operating exposure but are costly and possibly ineffective. Strategies to change financing policies include matching currency cash flow, back to back loans, and currency swaps. So that's pretty much the content to cover this chapter. And thank you for watching and listening. Have a good day. Thank you.